My name is Tarik Abdelazim. Peg Johnston. Stephen Schweitzer. We could all click off some bios before we start our smaller talk later. Just going to very briefly give you an outline. We're going to do about 10 minutes introduction, just kind of some background issues on mainstream corporate media. And I mean, we could turn this into, as Peg was saying, a 10-week course. So we're really going to try to squeeze some things in here. And then we're going to talk about some of the local successful media campaigns we've had. I'll be talking about cable franchise agreements. Stephen will be talking about indie media, Binghamton indie media. And then Peg will be talking about The Bridge, which is a local quarterly, and also work that she's done with another publication, Herald. Just so quickly we can kind of see, has anyone been involved in kind of community independent media? One? Great. How many have heard of indie media? Cool. All right, good. Has anyone heard of the National Media Reform Conference? One? Okay. Just throw a couple things out there. Prometheus Radio Project. All right. So this will be this will be very informative, I think. We got a pretty good lineup, and again, we'll keep it broad, and then we're going to try to leave about 30 minutes for discussion at the end, and we hope you guys enjoy the presentation. All right.
Great.
Turn it over to Steph.
Yep. Well, another question we were going to ask is, what's wrong with the media, or what's wrong with corporate media? And we came up with our own list of corporate ownership, advertiser influence, official agendas, the policy, public relations. We don't have time, as Tarik said, to go over all these issues, but we'll just hit on a few of these. One of them, of course, is corporate ownership. Because corporations are beholden to advertisers, they're not necessarily going to portray or report on stories that are important to the public. We'll have less diverse viewpoints, and fewer opportunities are available for underrepresented issues. This is the landscape of most of the media in the United States. Media consolidation has been growing, so to speak, over the years. From 1983, there are about 50 separate media companies. Now in the US, it's about 5. I think worldwide, it's 10. And so as these media companies consolidate, there's kind of a homogenous reporting from the news media. And a lot of this grew out of deregulation from the Reagan eras. There's an oversight group called the FCC, Federal Communications Commission, that's supposed to guarantee the public airwaves for the public, and they seem to be following corporate interests more than public interests. And along with that, media consolidation becomes, it gets ultra concentrated. For example, if we look at Time, they merged with AOL Online in January 2001, one of the largest mergers, created the world's biggest media company. News Corporation, which is from Rupert Murdoch. He controls Fox News. They also have the New York Post, and recently had purchased the Wall Street Journal. So here's one company owning a few of the media outlets, so when their message gets broadcast, it's all the same across different platforms. And then this phenomena gets worse when we start talking about interlock. Interlock is where board of directors on these media companies are also board of directors on other corporations. With the New York Times, board of directors are also involved with the Carlyle Group, Eli Lilly, Ford, Johnston & Johnson, and other corporations. A research team at Sonoma State University determined that only 118 people comprise the membership on the boards of directors of 10 big media giants. These 118 individuals sit on the corporate boards of 288 national and international corporations. So they're all interconnected here, controlling what comes out of the news media. For example, Disney, along with Halliburton, could set up a situation where ABC is not going to report on what's happening with Halliburton in Iraq. Halliburton was awarded a no-bid contract to help with the oil industry in Iraq, and very little bit of that was reported in the news. Locally, we have a newspaper run by the Gannett Corporation, And these board of directors are also involved with Lockheed Martin and others. So anytime there's Lockheed Martin makes aircraft and military equipment. And so anytime they're awarded a contract, they're always splashed on the front page of our local paper, but never the negative aspects of what they're actually producing as far as weapons of destruction in the military-industrial complex. Censorship is another issue. They suppress stories that don't serve the interests of the corporations. A couple examples, in '97, the Fox Broadcasting Company in Florida fired 2 reporters and suppressed a story they had produced about one of Fox's major advertisers, Monsanto, concerning the health effects of the bovine growth hormone. Monsanto took action after Fox and threatened to sue over the story. So you see that more and more, these stories that independent or investigative journalists are being suppressed by the corporations who control the media. Another example would be the repeated refusal of networks to broadcast ads from anti-war advocates and liberal groups. A famous case from Super Bowl 38, where CBS refused to air an ad criticizing the growing federal budget deficit, but aired a spot celebrating the Office of National Drug Control Policy. But fortunately, there are other activists out there working on censored issues. This is put out by Project Censored. How many people have heard of the Homegrown Terrorist Prevention Act? Okay, a few of you. This was an underreported story. Basically, this establishes a national commission and a university-based center for excellence to study and propose legislation to prevent the threat of radicalization of Americans. And when you can look at this conference as one of those radicalization events. And you'll find other stories not in the corporate media, and they're being covered right here in the Social Justice Conference. Onondaga land rights, animal rights, women incarceration. When was the last time you heard of any of those issues being reported in the corporate media? Also, in 2007, 2008, there was a national impeachment movement that was ignored by corporate media. So obviously this is a huge problem with, for progressive values, for social justice issues. But there is media reform. And one of the groups supposed to be looking out for us is the Federal Communication Commission, the FCC. And one of their objectives here is to protect us from anti-competitive behavior. This is a 5-person board that supposedly oversees the media. But in 2007, they voted to eliminate the cross-ownership ban that was intended to prevent the same company from controlling TV stations and newspapers in the same market. This was deliberately set up back in the 30s to make sure that one company didn't control the public opinion of the whole market by keeping the newspaper and the television separate. But they voted to eliminate that ban in 2007. Fortunately, the Senate received phone calls, thousands of letters, and they overturned it. They vetoed this. But it just goes to show you one more struggle we're up against is not only does the media control the airwaves, but the oversight group is also controlled by corporations. But fortunately, we've got people fighting on our side for real media reform. So that's a bit on media reform. Tarik's going to talk about some local initiatives here that we've countered to or added to the media reform voice.
My name is Tarik Abdelazim. I'm currently serving as deputy mayor here in the city of Binghamton. I was very much engaged in some media advocacy work prior to being kind of selected by Mayor Ryan to join this team, and did some local work here. Was also very much involved in some education around the Iraq War and nonviolence education, as well as coalition building in the area. It was a kind of an ad hoc position that we created through funds from private donors and the community progressive advocate, and I did that throughout 2005. And one of the things that I did during that time was I went to this amazing conference called the National Media Reform Conference. was the first time it was held in 2005, an amazing venue. And I think that since then it's exploded. And what it indicates, I think, is that there's a growing understanding among citizens that our media system is completely messed up, and that it is not serving democratic interest at all. And if we want to restore a certain degree of progressive participatory democracy, then we have to somehow reclaim our media. There has to be reform efforts as well as kind of emerging citizen alternative media forms in our local communities. So I went to this conference and I heard of this thing called cable franchise agreements. Has anyone heard of these? Yeah, I was like, what are you talking about? And it was an amazing thing. I was like, holy cow, every cable company has to basically enter into a contract with the municipality in which it does business. So here we have Time Warner Cable. It serves the greater Binghamton area. They have to sign a contract with every municipality: Vestal, Endicott, Town of Union, City of Binghamton, Port Day, Town of Dickinson. And this is all throughout the nation. And basically that is an amazing opportunity for local media advocates to try to incorporate, or try to change, or get some reform measures in to allow for community media. You can talk to your cable companies about, and this is, you can force them to fund community media centers. $200,000 a year. And now with equipment as cheap as it is, with streaming, imagine what that could do. You could force them to increase more of their channel allotment towards public, educational, or governmental programming. You can make them put aside some of their bandwidth when they move to digital transition, so you could use it for municipal Wi-Fi. And as more and more technologies are coming up and changes in some of our spectrum policy, this is going to be a huge opportunity for community media down the road. So there are all these things, and I was like, wow, this is amazing. So I went back to Binghamton. Lo and behold, the community, our government was in the final stages of renegotiating their cable franchise agreement. Time Warner probably, I know that they hated that. So I came back, I got together some friends and explained to them, you know, what was possible. There's a great media advocate who's been doing some long time work, Bill Houston, in the area. Got him involved, he was very much aware of this. And we decided, you know, let's do a full court push. I mean, they were 2 years in negotiating this contract. And we said, all right, let's just try to get it at the end. Let's see what we can incorporate. When we looked at what they were doing, they had completely, like most municipalities, overlooked what this agreement and what this means for local media. The administration had done absolutely nothing to try to gain further public interests into the agreement. So we went to public hearing. We very quickly got all of our information together. We're tapping into a larger network of progressives here in the area, largely through indie media that Stefan will talk about. And we showed up at the mayor's office at the public hearing, and trust me, I'm in there now. Usually when you have these public hearings, it's like you hear crickets, maybe one person comes. There are 70 people that crammed into the mayor's conference room. Totally caught him off guard. The most beautiful thing was we brought a camera. We brought a camera and we came armed with questions and information. And we drilled them. And we did not make them look good. And we captured it all on video. So it was wonderful. So Stefan is like the video guru. He put together this great little half-hour clip. How many people know about public access channels? Right? Okay, you see these, you know, these are sometimes like the crazy people at 2 in the morning, you know, on like Channel 4, Channel 12. I'm telling you, so many more people watch this than you think. This is a really powerful way to speak to the community, and it's speaking to your neighbors, speaking to your friends, speaking to your family members. We put this on public access, and it was literally, I think, devastating. It showed that they had no idea what they were talking about, that we were fully informed, and that there were all of these opportunities to secure benefits for our community. Council members got interested. We gave them packets. The mayor pulled back the agreement that he had submitted to council. invited us in for a private discussion, 4 of us were in the conference room. We gave them a whole list, a full packet of all the things that you can do. We included references from other franchise agreements, very progressive agreements, full laundry list. Fortunately, he didn't incorporate all of them, and we weren't able to win every single item that we won, but we certainly got some benefits. One was that we were able to turn, basically these are called origination points. All of our city council meetings are televised live on Channel 12. That's called an origination point. It's where you originate programming. So we were able to negotiate into the contract where Binghamton High School, another Catholic high school in the area, Binghamton University, and Binghamton Broome Community College would all be designated origination points. And Time Warner had to create these at their expense, excuse me. And the coolest thing, 3 months after this contract was negotiated in December of 2005, on March 2006, I think 70,000 subscribers were able to watch Noam Chomsky live here at Binghamton University. Huge. When do you think like anybody's ever seen Noam Chomsky on their local, evening news? So that was possible because of the origination point. We also won some smaller things. We were able to eliminate a tax loophole that Time Warner Cable was taking advantage of. And again, if we had had more time, we think we could have argued for some better options. I'll tell you though, we made one mistake in the beginning. And that was we talked about, when we first met with the press, and we had the meeting with kind of the called press conferences, is we mentioned one damning and explosive comment that we wanted Time Warner to create a $1 million community media center. And that was just, because for the rest of the debate, as we started going, that was what kept coming back at us. And subscribers were saying, you want us to fund $1 million? And it's not needed. You guys know that media can be produced so cheaply now. A few cameras, you get some server space, you get a room, you pay for rent. You can do that for $50,000, $100,000, pay for some stipends to people to help and train, do a lot of media training. So something that you should do, immediately go back to your communities. I mean, how many people are from outside Binghamton? Awesome, okay. Go back to your communities. Call your clerk's office or your lawyer, the legal department in your city, and ask them, when is the cable franchise agreement up for renewal? There's plenty of information here that I can give. If anyone wants to talk more about that, I'd be happy to show you and point you in the right direction. But an awesome opportunity for reform in your communities, and you definitely need to take advantage of it. I'll just say this one last thing, I have a couple more minutes. We're moving, everybody knows about the transition to digital, from analog to digital. All right, this is going to happen in 2007. It is happening now in February of 2009. Basically, we have a spectrum. These are our commons. It's like a 100-lane highway that we have given corporations exclusive right to pass information and to shape our community discourse. What's amazing is that this 100-lane highway is immediately going to become like a 500-lane highway when you switch to digital. And all of those lanes should be opened back up. They should be opened back up for communities, for public interest. Again, this is going to be a huge boon if we are informed and we take advantage of it. And when you look at the cable franchise agreement, if it's something that you can negotiate, a lot of municipalities are saying you need to set aside 10% of your bandwidth. Not 2 channels. Don't even talk about channels. It's capacity. You're setting aside 10%. We have a very active local arts community here. The local arts community could be using that. We have a very active social justice. They could be using that. Nonprofits could be using that, maybe helping people get better services. So there's a whole host of opportunities. Again, recognize that this transition that's coming, it's going to be huge, and we need to seize it. All right, so I'm going to turn it over to Steph.
Great. I just wanted to add on to that. That public access television is very easy to get involved with. How many people are using video now? A couple. Okay. Very easy. You just go up to your local cable provider. It's probably a form you fill out. You get a slot 1 day a week or 1 hour a week, maybe 2 hours a week. put together a tape and submit it on it. And like Tarik said, you'll be surprised who your audience is. Here locally, about 70,000 people get to see public access. And with the 3 or 4 progressive media producers, we share tapes so we can actually get that message out maybe 4 to 6 times a week. So I encourage you to go back to your municipality and look into that, and it's free. It's free. That's part of what the deal was with our public airwaves. And into now the 21st century, or since the internet, independent media has given us another venue to share progressive stories. This grew out of the 1999 World Trade Organization protests in Seattle. The activists were aware that corporate media were always going to paint protesters in a negative light. So they went out there with their own cameras and reporters, got a website up, and started posting the actuality of what's been happening out on the streets of Seattle. Since then, and up to about now 2006, there are over 150 IMCs worldwide. In Ireland, in Latin America. Here in the US, I think there's about 60 different indie media centers. And some activists locally here in 2004 started Binghamton Indie Media. And the advantages for a website, not only having a web presence, is you'll let the community know that there are other progressives out there. But we also have something called open publishing. This is the indie media for the US site with Philadelphia, Los Angeles, Boston, New Orleans. This place is Hudson Mohawk over by Troy, over by Schenectady and Albany, New York. And all of these stories that were posted are just because of open publishing, that anyone can publish a story or post videos or post photographs of what's happening in their area. And so we did that locally for since 2004, and we're able to build a base of our progressives, not only for them to post issues that are important to them, but we organize film screenings as well in the community. And with those film screenings, we had sign-up sheets, and we got email addresses, and we were able to advertise more local events using a component of the Indie Media website called Radicalendar, where people can publish their events on these calendars. And this is something you can do in your community as well. You don't have to be affiliated with IMC. You can go to radicalendar.org. And with our film screenings, which seem to be the most popular public event, we built up our subscription base for Radicalendar to about 750 people. And this website generates a once-a-week email of all the progressive events that are happening in the area. And because of our indie media presence, we started becoming kind of I lost the word there. Portal? Yeah, a portal for sharing information between peace and social justice, GBLT groups. We also did a lot of outreach, showing people how to use the website. We would go to different organizations and train people how to use media tools so that when larger issues came to our community, one of them was a popular anti-war trial, we had the video crew and reporters basically up to speed to cover that event, which actually became kind of a national, if not a worldwide, focal point for Binghamton. And Binghamton Indie Media is still carried on through a quarterly newspaper called The Bridge. And Peg Johnston's going to speak a little bit more about that.
My name is Peg Johnston. I've been involved in I guess now what you would call independent media pretty much like forever. But one of the things that I kind of realized pretty early on, and I sort of embrace this definition of power, is that it's the ability to reach people with your message. And in the 60s, we were reaching people with leaflets and little newspapers and so forth. The whole anti-war thing that brought the Vietnam War to a close. And then public demonstrations and posters and buttons and all that stuff. But when it really started to flip was when we realized that 5 seconds on the news was worth a lot more than 10,000 buttons. You know, they were all important because one sort of filled out the other, one was, you know, more personal, whatever. But that 5 seconds from protesters being dragged away or somebody being beaten or tear gassed or whatever was very, very powerful. So I think it's important to look at independent media as media that you control, but also to understand that media, the mainstream media has its place. And one of the people that was supposed to be here instead of me was someone who worked in mainstream media. And she could sneak stories in, and she could give a certain spin. She was constrained by advertisers, very constrained. You know, we're like, well, how much does it really matter that Pepsi, you know, is controlling this? Or Lehman Brothers. It really does matter. I mean, it's huge who the advertisers are and what stories get covered. So I was involved from, I think, 1980 to 1996, so 16 years of a publication called Hera, which was a women's publication, kind of very low tech. There's one copy I had here that was printed in dot matrix printer, you know, it was all done by hand, you know, there was no layout, you know. I still sometimes do things by hand, but it's a little 8-page thing. And, you know, this was pre-internet, and I know it's hard to get our brains around pre-internet. Feel free to interrupt these people, don't worry, get in there, have a seat. But this was way before, you know, we were connected. So independent media was the connection for all these people to know what was going on in different communities, what was going on nationally, what was going on in their own community. And we put this out every month for about 16 years. So it was pretty intense. Some of the objectives or the philosophy that we really embraced, and you can still read it, although it seems a little dated, but you could still read it at the Women's Institute for Freedom of the Press. It's wifp.org. One is that we tended to go with first person and trusting more first person accounts rather than objective. You know, in the media they talk to one person on one side and one person on the other side, and that was objective. You know, we see that a lot now with abortion stories. Even if it has nothing to do with it, they have to go to the local Right to Life group or the local whatever, and the local pro-choice people, and it's, you know, the reporter calls me and he goes, oh, well, we're rounding up the usual suspects, you know, can you give a quote? And it's like so dead and boring, you know. So we really focused a lot on first-person narratives. The other thing that we kind of got away from, it seemed like mainstream media is really about conflict and about violence. You know, I'm sure you've all heard, if it bleeds, it leads. And we kind of wanted to get away from that. So more in-depth, more perspective. The other thing that we realized in this paper is that mass media was really quite hostile to women, and that there was a lot of work at that stage, and I imagine still today, at catching up and giving a different view of women. And you could say substitute women for any minority group at this point. The other thing was about content. You know, we might have covered some of the same information that was available in the mainstream media, but we gave our slant to it, or we filled it in. You know, and I'll get to the bridge in a minute, but a local story, current story, is this gas drilling. You know, and there's a lot of inches about it, a lot of press about it, a lot of airtime, but nobody says, well, what is this going to look like in my backyard? You know, what is it going to sound like? What is it going to do to the environment? What is it going to do to my life? You know, it's all about money. So I think that's where we can sort of fill in those gaps a little bit. One of the most controversial, nationally controversial things that we did in our paper, and we grew out of the, if I can find it here, we grew out of the movement to establish a rape crisis center here. And one of the things that the police and the justice people said is that we don't have a problem here. There were only 5 rapes last year. This was in 1977, 78. And they're like, well, you know, there's just no problem. And so you know, we had to prove, and the existence of the Rape Crisis Center did prove that there were 100 calls that we had of, you know, documented sexual assaults or abuse or whatever. So we started this, this series called Consumer Guide to Men. And we didn't, it was kind of funny, actually. See if I can find one. Well, I had it here. I'll pull it out for you if you're interested. But we really just took what was in the police beat in the newspaper and just copied it and just rewrote it and retyped it and said so-and-so and so-and-so and so. And the idea, the sort of tongue-in-cheek idea, was that if you were going on a blind date or if you were hooking up with somebody, you should have a list to check out whether he'd been accused of anything. You know, if women talk to each other, then they would know sort of the bad apples kind of thing. Well, this one, I mean, even though we weren't the press was publishing it and they were getting, I don't know how many tens of thousands of people they were reaching, and we were reaching a mailing list of 600, and then we'd throw away another 1,500 or something like that. I mean, ridiculous numbers. But it was a firestorm, and it was really about our perspective on what was going on. And just by singling it out was like, whoa, it was huge. And we also carried, you know, stuff of sort of just minority kind of news. The lesbian and gay community, you know, was really invisible, and we made it visible to the people who wanted to know. Other things we did were, you know, health and safety information that was just not available. Again, pre-internet. Political information. Most of our articles had, for more information, go to write this person, call this person. Which now is like sort of a joke because you can always Google anything. But in those days, I mean, the paper would say, oh, they'd give you an article. But then if you wanted to learn more about it, there was no way to learn more. There was never anybody that you could call or look up or write to or anything like that. So that was an important piece. And I think sort of the links approach to the internet is what we're still doing quite a bit of. Now, let's way fast forward to the bridge. I've been involved in it for a couple years. As Stefan said, it started in 2004 locally, or at least IMC started. And IMC is great. I mean, as he said, it's a connection to an international community, which is great. What we tend to do is sort of underreported stories, or again, local perspective on national stories. We're also giving local organizing people a chance to talk about what's important, what they're doing to get them. And again, go back to power is the ability to reach people with your message. So if 500 people know that the farm sanctuary exists and is working on, you know, cruelty to animals, that's better than if 50 people know on their mailing list, or 100 people, whatever. The more people who know, the more chance you have of getting your message to move them. I wanted to, and I know most of you are not local, but if anybody's interested, we are quite desperate. And I want to just say, all my experience lends me to say that the economics of these independent media are extremely fragile, particularly if you take big advertising out of the picture. Not that anyone is, you know, offering us any big ads, mind you. But even so, you know, even small ads are very hard to come by. And when I say economics, I mean money, but I also mean human capital. It's very hard to keep a group together. It's all volunteer. Our editor, you know, just is going back to school and has a big project at work, and it's like, okay, now what? So I don't have any great words of wisdom on that. I haven't always succeeded in that. Solving that problem, but it's a huge problem. And, you know, I think, again, if you have a little time, even a little time, you know, carve it out and offer your help wherever you are in whatever independent media is available to you, because it's tough. It's really tough. You would be able to speak to this more directly, but my understanding is that the first website that we had was basically taken down by spam and by kind of craziness. And, you know, I mean, whenever you select something, you know, you're, I guess, censoring, or you're, you know, choosing one thing over another, perspective. And it's an issue, and credibility is one of the things that at the Bridge we're really thinking a lot about, and our editor, believes that we should, at least label what's opinion, what's analysis, what's news, and if it's news, try to at least represent kind of the full scale of what's going on.
Yeah, and last comment, I think that is continually what nags citizen journalism, is the sense of credibility, the journalism credo. But at the same time, if you look at corporate media, you can see that what they've been consistently hacking away at is their investigative reporting departments. They don't talk about gathering new information. Basically, they're spending investments on repackaging and presenting information. And that's clear. That's not anything that I'm saying that the industry wouldn't agree to. It's such a profit-driven industry. You would think that newspapers are such they're not making a lot of money. Throughout the 2002, they were making double digits almost every year. The average in 2004 was only 23%. And that wasn't because revenues were increasing. It was because they were cutting and cutting and cutting in their newsroom. And that's the motive. Whoever has the best results at the quarterly report, their stock is going to tick up a few. So I think just as corporate media is struggling with that, how do you get authentic journalism? Most people entering now, they don't have journalism degrees. They have communication degrees. They know how to tilt their head. They know inflection. This is serious. And unfortunately, the person could have talked about that who's been inside the system. So this is something that we have to focus on. If you're going to do community media, and the Bridge is really trying to do this, is to give workshops. Make them follow basic, minimal standards, because you need to build trust in the community in which you're publishing.
Our local paper, I don't know about where you live, but our local paper is what I call the DIY approach to journalism. It's the do-it-yourself. So any citizen, I'm sure they don't take everything, but can write an article and get some images and they'll publish it. They fired almost all their reporters. There must be like 2 of them.
And they're hungry for stories.
Which is a great opportunity for us. Some of the more acceptable minority opinions are getting a lot of great play. So, anyway, you had a question?
The Rad calendar looked really, really interesting, and it said they had a Binghamton title. But I was wondering how big that is, how widespread, and then how easy it is to add your own events or events that you just
Yeah, it's really easy to add your own event. You just click on Add Your Event and then choose Binghamton IMC, and it'll go out to your local, and you can sign up to have it go locally to you, but then the Binghamton IMC feeds all of that to a mailing list, and we often add other, emphasis or whatever. So it's a weekly bulletin that goes out.
Statewide?
It's
worldwide.
Global.
Yeah,
Any group can establish an account. You could have looked at all of the IMCs, because there are about 40 IMCs that use Reddit Calendar, and you could select all of them, and then you'd see the events for all of them. So you can go and create a group for your area or an organization in your area, and then you could click that and you would just see your events. Yeah, very, very great tool.
Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, 2 questions. One is, are the indie media and the IMCs, are they together?
It's the same.
Okay, and then what kind of things do you see coming down, like since the Republican Convention back in 2002 in New York City, they're using all that indie media stuff to show that the police were wrong, and so they're cracking down more on indie media. Do you see that kind of stuff happening, or how does it affect the media center?
Absolutely. Well, you saw at the Republican National Convention how independent media journalists were being arrested.
Right. Besides that event, is it happening? Is it more difficult to get?
There have been servers sabotaged. Indie medias have reported that their servers have been sabotaged.
Or confiscated, too.
They have been confiscated in some occasions.
But it's more harassment, because the 2 issues I've heard about servers being confiscated by FBI and other officials, the people involved with it were cleared of charges, so it was more of harassment, and they returned all their equipment. I think corporate media is not afraid of indie media,
Yeah.
because, we haven't really punched through that bubble of mainstream media. Just, you know, even here, only about 25% people knew of indie media. In some of the larger cities, I'm not sure, you know, how the police force, you know, approaches journalists.
Yeah, I don't see it as that part is a huge issue. I think when you grab onto something like Time Warner, you can bet which you guys were. You know, that could have,
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think it did, but, you know.
Actually, it did a little.
Did it? Okay,
Yeah.
well, you know, it just seems like when you're really getting your teeth into it, but at this point, they're winning the war of attrition, you know? I mean, we're like the mouse that roared, or the mouse that squeaked at this point.
I had an experience in D.C. where we were covering the recount election in 2005, the Ohio electoral votes, and we weren't allowed in to the media gallery at the Capitol because we didn't derive, I think it was 50% of our income as journalists. So some organizations may block us out because we're volunteers.
One thing that you said, that, you know, corporate media is not afraid of the alternative press. Absolutely. But there is one tactic that the alternative press uses, which is a tactic that everyone in this room, you know, without having to go and create, you know, public access media or create a 501c3 to actually create a public access center, anything like that. You know, anybody who can afford to buy a magic marker can leave this room and create mass media that will be seen by tens of thousands of people possibly, and that's called culture jamming, which is something that's difficult to discuss under surveillance. You know, it doesn't really matter.
Right.
But is there, culture jamming is what the mass media is afraid of. It's I believe culture jamming, people keying SUVs, you know, it didn't happen much, it's vandalism, but ultimately it de-hipped something that was cool. So, you know, is there culture jamming going on?
No, that's a great point. That's just kind of the spectrum of the indie media movement. You know, from so-called legitimate journalism to just, you know, stencils on a sidewalk with spray paint. And,
Yeah, historically, there was certainly a lot that was done, and, you know, it's hard to talk about it because some of it was illegal, but, you know, I know one of the things that this HERA group did, or some of the same people who were involved in that, was called the Shadow Project, where we, you know, in August of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, you know, those two anniversaries, you know, we would create a shadow of yourself so that if a bomb happened, you know, it irradiated everything around you and created this shadow of bodies and so forth. So we all created little shadows of ourselves and then painted the sidewalk so that you could see the shadow on our dogs and kids, and, you know, we did everything crazy. And of course, the city went bonkers. Because, I mean, it washed off. We made sure that it was a water-based, but it stayed a few weeks. And, you know, it was just a way of doing that. And that's not exactly culture jamming, but it's that kind of awareness that gets media attention, that, you know, sort of starts rolling things.
There hasn't been much locally, but one of the things that we try to focus on is also building the coalition, using media as a way to strengthen our network among the different groups, because that is so key. And that's what scares me. At the same time that we have all these amazing tools to create content and media, is that it also allows for almost hyper niching. We already know, like, every group wants their listserv, every group wants their website, every group wants to have, you know, their own discussion board. And it is going to further kind of divide all of us who share so many values in common. And so how do you create, we wanted to turn indie media literally into a portal, to really have everyone contribute your information there, and to trust that as a central source. And I would urge others to really focus on that, because I think culture jamming is good, makes someone think for a few minutes, but long term, like where you're really changing power structures, where you're really making legislative and policy changes in your community to better those members, it takes a lot of work, and you need that connections. You need to build that movement. You know, Orwell says during times of universal deceit, telling the truth is a revolutionary act, and it has to be done together. We have video news releases that are actually, you know, put together by corporate interests, by pharmaceutical industries that are sent to local medias, again, because it's just content, and what they need is content. They don't need journalism, they need content. You have AstroTurf organizations. They're not really, you know, grassroots, they're AstroTurf. In Project Censor 2009, they speak specifically about this. They call it the truth emergency, that there truly is a truth emergency in this country. And there, apparently about 300 media activists got together in California and they started to write some principles and how they're going to deal with this. Because it's everything. It's everything across the board. It's not just one or two issues. We don't know what can be truthworthy. And that's why I think it's only going to be really relying on some of those that are just going to, you're just going to have to build. You know, I mean, a lot of people go to Democracy Now! With the National Media Reform Conference, they said that was the most trusted news organization. I mean, it's a very uniform group, let's be honest about that, in the survey. But the same thing, and that's why when talking about local media, try to build trust. Admit when you're wrong. Say, you know, when you don't know the facts, say it. Try to really get to the bottom of some stories, because that's important.
I think one of the biggest problems facing the independent media is, you know, that old saying, preaching to the choir. The kind of person that would go, oh, it's an independent media publication, I'm going to pick that up and check out what it has to offer. How would you guys see, you know, getting out there and trying to get these things not just into the hands of people who wouldn't normally pick them up, but into the minds of those people who would normally pick it up? Like, how do we go out there and show these people, the mainstream media, like you said, they're not reporting, they want content so they can sell ad space. How do we talk to those people?
Well, I think, you know, Tarik said, you know, just a minute ago, the credibility thing I think is huge. I mean, just for my own work, you know, like, which would you likely pick up, this or this? You know, I mean, this looks like completely amateurish, and this has some semblance of looking like a newspaper. So that's one thing. I think the other really more important strategy in some ways is to get people of the group that you're trying to reach to write for it and to be involved and to distribute it and to do whatever they want to do, to get their perspective in there, because then there's some buy-in.
And that's the part with the network coalition. In the media, our motto was you never host a film screening unless you have at least one other co-sponsor. So when we did the Walmart, everyone remembers that Project Greenwald movie, the high cost and low prices. We sent invitations out to every labor union in the area, and we had it at a church that has an active social justice organization. We had, I mean, the place was packed, 400 people in the church, overflowing, and so we had to have additional screenings. And then you make sure you get everyone's email address and you try to build that. So never host an event in which you're preaching to the choir.
We've been very successful getting social justice issues in our local media here.
Yeah, and that's not to be underestimated. The second thing, it's a very cheap tactic, but it's a great one. Go to your city council with something that you want to see the community talk about that's currently being ignored. We put impeachment into the community discussion by a bunch of us submitting a resolution to the city council to call for the impeachment of President Bush. Prior to that, our local newspaper didn't run one article on impeachment. While that 4-week debate was going on, they ran about half a dozen. Yeah, it pissed some people off, of course, but a lot more people were talking about it because we forced it into the community discourse. Think about that. Think about how you can use your legislative bodies at the local level to enter into some items into the discourse.
I don't want to underestimate the importance of Tarik's point about coalition building, but I do want to say that it's hard work. It's really hard work because a lot of groups are very, you know, turf-minded. They have their own media outlets. They do all they can to get their own newsletter out or their own listserv or their own whatever. And they don't have much energy beyond that. And I think everybody's pretty afraid that they'll lose what they've got. So it's hard work. I mean, I think you've got some winning strategies. I would love if we had those strategies back. Because Tarik has moved to the mayor's office and is not as available as he was. But it's hard work, and I think that discussion right there bears some, will bear some fruit if you can have it in your communities.
And we might add that, with the progressive outreach that we did in 2003, 2004, led to this cable contract deal with the city. We were having progressive groups coming into indie media as, like I said, the clearinghouse of finding out what's happening in the community. We built something called the Southern Tier Progressive Coalition, where the first meeting had over 300 people involved. That led to the election of the mayor in 2005, and we were able to build that kind of progressive base to get a progressive mayor in office, and I believe that's how that helped.
I think the one problem is that Stefan and I and a couple others were really pushing hard because we had time. We were single, we didn't care making just a few $1,000s over a quarter. But that's the danger of these grassroots movements too, is that if you're not sharing skills, if you're not building the capacity in your organization, I mean, we pulled back and the website didn't. We lost it, it went down. And so Peg and some others have stepped in and taken their years of experience and tried to continue it. But it's something that you have to be sharing your skills and training and making sure that it's decentralized, that few people can drop out, and that you'll continue to push ahead and make some progress.
You also need a person, and I'm sure there are a couple different versions of this, but a person who crosses many different groups, who has credibility and is known in many different groups. And I don't know if you guys have read The Tipping Point, a couple of years back by Malcolm Gladwell. But he gives the example of Paul Revere. Apparently there was some other rider on that fateful night who went out and didn't get anybody to come out. But Paul Revere was in every social organization that was available in Boston. He knew everyone. So when he said the British are coming, move out, they all responded like that. Whereas this other poor schmo who who's lost to history, got a couple people to sort of say, oh, well, maybe, and that the British were out. And so that kind of Paul Revere figure, and Eric was one of them more recently. You guys were probably in the other, but who have credibility in all sorts of different movements, and who can bring all those people together.